the desk today, Sophia Warringer, Deputy Policy Director of the Centre for Social Justice, and Peter Barnes, a political strategist. Lovely to have you both here. Sophia, maybe I can ask you a little bit about paedophile gangs, actually, because as Deputy Policy Director of the Centre for Social Justice, this is something that will have come up for you from time to time. I mean, we're asking the question about what the solution is to this, or whether there should be a public inquiry, or what's your kind of take on this situation, especially in terms of what Jess Phillips has done this week. Oldham Council said, we want an inquiry, please fund it. She said no.
Well, this is an example of the most deprived and most left behind communities being ignored by the establishment. These victims, often white, working class girls from this area of Oldham and of course across the country as well, often not having the political capital or the voice to be able to make themselves heard, and when they do, being stopped at every turn by the people who are supposed to help them. And I think the problem with Jess Phillips' response as the safeguarding minister is that she has tried to rebut it on a technical point. She's tried to say this is the council's responsibility because it's a council matter and it happened within their jurisdiction. But we are way beyond technical points now. This is a very emotive subject, and rightly so. When you've read the sentencing remarks of what happened to those victims, it's absolutely heartbreaking. In fact, sometimes you can't even read them. Yes. It's too much. And so she's not tuning into the emotional response that this case needs, and therefore I think she's got the mood completely wrong. It's interesting, actually, because I spoke to one of the people who was the head of an inquiry, actually, into a lawyer, a KC, yesterday. I spoke to him on Talk Drive, and he was making a pretty strong argument, actually, about why there shouldn't be national inquiries. Why he's saying his argument was essentially he had overseen the Telford inquiry and said a local inquiry, independent, obviously, of the council that's funding it, but nonetheless a local inquiry where you can have not a courtroom, but actually go into victims' or survivors' homes, have a discussion with them rather than interrogating them. You get more from them, you get more detail, you have a better picture of what is going on. So he explained that far better to me than Jess Phillips has. Maybe she has a point, actually, in what she's saying. I wonder what you think, Peter.
No, I think you're perfectly right on that. I think public inquiries tend to be very adversarial, and I think they don't really get to an answer because everybody's trying to defend themselves and, you know, save their backside, for want of a better phrase. Well, I think the problem with Jess Phillips is that she hasn't really listened to the concerns of people. She's rather run railroad over people and talked down to them. I think this has been Jess Phillips' problem for a very long time. I think she's a terrible communicator because she doesn't really want to listen to what people say. She's more interested in telling them what they should think. And I think this is why Jess Phillips was the real wrong person to be in charge of anything like this, because obviously the emotions run very high.
Some would argue that she is actually the best person to be in charge of it because it's her life's work. It's what she's talked about a lot. She worked in a domestic abuse shelter herself. I mean, she's someone who knows this inside out.
Well, if that's true, then she's handled this absolutely catastrophically worse than she should have. You know, like they always say for a sports player, it's only as good as their last game. And let's be real, if this is Jess Phillips' last game, it's been awful. I mean, I couldn't believe the way that she came out in the press and the comments that she made. I thought was absolutely staggering. I thought he showed a real naivety in government. Actually, I think I've noticed this before when she's been caught up with other things to do with being in a hospital and getting preferential treatment or something. I was like, that's not what a minister should say. She still thinks she's in opposition, and I think this is true of many people in the cabinet at the moment.
I don't want to go too far down the road of making this a political argument, because actually it isn't really. It's actually about the wider issue. But there is a very legitimate question about why no one is talking about different parts of the state. For example, the National Crime Agency and their role in all of this, Sophia. Why do you think that question isn't being asked in all of this? And what should they be doing that they're not doing?
Well, I guess that's why people want a national inquiry, is so that they can get all these component parts together. I think there might be a limit to how a local inquiry can convene people on that level and, of course, investigate one of the biggest questions in this whole case, which is the role of the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, which, of course, was Sir Keir Starmer. And, of course, he did, at the time, very strongly condemn what was happened. He said that a lot of the cover-up had been driven by a fear of being accused of being racist. So he has made good noises in that direction previously, but I think there is a big question to be asked about all the agencies involved: councillors, police, statutory services, social workers, other people who were their responsibility to safeguard these young people. people. And also we have to remember this has been something in the public domain for a while, and it was in fact some inflammatory tweets and comments from overseas which has brought this up again as an issue. And we can't be reacting to some people in America deciding to take to their phones and tweet. We need to be proactive about safeguarding the most vulnerable people in our society, and unfortunately we are so on the back foot with this issue.
Bill is in Romsey and says, morning Peter, morning Bill, Starmer does not want an inquiry into rape gangs because of the votes Labour would lose. If people are saying this is still going on, where are the police? I think there are a lot of questions about that. I think there are a lot of questions about the fact that these are overwhelmingly Pakistani Muslim gangs. We have heard so little from the Muslim faith, from community, political leaders. Let's hear from them. Let's hear what they have to say about that. What work is actually going on within that community right now to tackle the attitudes driving these rape gangs? There's so much more to discuss on this. We're going to continue to discuss it tomorrow on this programme. We're going to make sure that we illuminate the issue. Kevin in Barnstable says statutory rape is statutory rape, Peter. What is there to review? A Labour Party spokesperson, oh the irony, says Peter, no one prepared to even take ownership of this statement. The hypocrisy continues. We're going to continue to talk about this, I promise, today and tomorrow, but I just want to ask Sophia and Peter here on the debate desk about a couple of other aspects, including a big story in the Daily Telegraph today about a fast track of NHS care for asylum seekers. Some of the examples they give about Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in South East London, for example, offering a special walk-in service for refused asylum seekers and undocumented migrants, where they can receive a full health assessment, treatment of minor illnesses and referrals to specialist services. By contrast, 15% of residents had to wait at least a week before seeing a doctor in November. Failed asylum seekers in Stoke-on-Trent can receive NHS help at Norfolk Street Surgery to access a GP and a dentist. On the other hand, a 2022 survey found almost 3/4 of the city's residents had trouble seeing an NHS dentist. Why is there a two-tier system here? It's certainly been illuminated this morning. Peter, what is your view on this?
Well, obviously, I think it is the prime example of the two-tier society, and I think it is because that this country continues to bend over backwards to people that don't have a right to be here. I hate to be this guy, but why, if you don't have a right to be here, are we giving services and money and resources that could be going to people who desperately need it in this country, to people that shouldn't really be here? It staggers me. Like last month, 1 in 4 patients had to wait over 4 hours in A&E, and 45,000 patients saw it delayed by 12 hours in terms of receiving treatment. That is astronomical figures, and yet it is going up and up and up, and yet all we keep hearing is, well, we've got to save the NHS, we've got to keep throwing money at it. What we need to start doing is actually policing who is using the NHS, and are we actually allocating resources correctly? One thing I've found about most of the migrant crisis debate and all these other aspects of it has been about choices, and it's always the successive governments, and I include the Conservatives in this, have always chosen the migrant side of the argument every single time, and it has been at the expense of the British public, and it has to stop, because this is why people keep coming. This is the pull factors that they have here are the main driver, and fixing small things like this will help stop the small boats. You know, this idea that you just turn the boats around is an absolute nonsense, but what you can do is you limit what they receive, so you make it less appealing to get here, and that's why this kind of story is actually really important to tackle, because it's something that the government can actually do, and they are yet again refusing to do it because it's minorities.
I am going to say, I'm going to sound like an absolute broken record here, but I've said this before, I've said this many times on this programme and many programmes. The key point of so many stories that we cover in this station is really basic: fairness. Sophia, this isn't fair.
You're completely right, because if you were going to design a story to create outreach amongst the general public, the two things you'd want to stick to are NHS service waiting times and immigration, and this ticks both of them. So I do think this really gets to the heart of why so many people are disgruntled in this country. on one hand, yes, you absolutely want to be compassionate to those who are seeking refuge in this country, and we have a long track record, I think, of protecting most vulnerable in this country who are coming from overseas. And yes, they may have specific concerns and specific medical conditions, which means that they need their own kind of tailored approach, but that should not come at the expense of those who are coming, who live in this country already, who are trying to access the services, who pay tax in order to support them. And I think the criteria for one of these services at UCLH was those who might struggle to attend A&E due to the long delays waiting to be seen. Well, is that not any person in this country? I had a family member recently who went to A&E and the sign went up, said it's a 12-hour wait, so they went home. You know, this is anybody who is struggling to access. So I do think you're completely right. Fairness is at the heart of this problem, and the perception issue is really important, because it is stories like this that make people feel, who are born in this country, who live in this country legitimately, who have legal status to live here and who pay tax. It is stories like this that make them feel like they are second-class citizens, and that is completely wrong.
Well, we have a bit more information about the victims, the 14 victims of the terrorist attack in New Orleans, and we know that one of them is a British man. His name is Edward Pettifer. He's from Chelsea in West London. He was killed in the attack, and that has been confirmed by the Metropolitan Police. The King is understood to be deeply saddened by the death of Mr. Pettifer, who was killed in the attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day, murdered by that terrorist. There are reports that he was the stepson of a former royal nanny. I think, I'm not sure, but I think they're referring to a woman called Tiggy Legg Burke, who then became Tiggy Pettifer, who was the nanny to William and Harry. No doubt all the information will be revealed in regard to that, but we know for sure that Edward Pettifer from Chelsea has been a victim of that horrendous terrorist attack that happened in New Orleans, and of course when we hear more about that we will bring that to you. Thanks for all your messages. I'll return to them in a second, but I want to talk about the story about Wes Streeting. We're talking to him on the programme tomorrow. We'll ask him this question as well: why he thinks it's reasonable to say that he's talked about campaigners giving out advice in the wake of the decision to strip 10 million pensioners of their annual fuel payment. He's urged householders to turn their heating up this weekend, despite the government's cuts to winter fuel allowance. Fine to turn up your heat if you can afford it. What if you can't? Sophia?
So I don't understand the comms perspective of this. They had a huge fight over cutting the winter fuel allowance, means testing it. I think actually that was the right decision. I don't think it was right that pensioners, some of whom are very wealthy, get that indiscriminately. Maybe the way they handled it could have been better. But then to deliberately wade back into that row, which split some part of their party, obviously some of the MPs voted against the government on that motion. So it feels very tone deaf to deliberately wade back and to remind people that they'd cut this winter fuel allowance, whilst also doing something that's very nanny state of telling people to turn their heating up. Look, there are huge problems with the NHS. I know we've got announcements coming on Monday from the Prime Minister about how he's going to cut waiting times. I would love for them to focus their attention on solving those issues rather than telling me to turn my heating up. In fact, it makes me want to turn my heating off because they've told me to turn it up. Yes, it's very cold, but I just feel like they're putting their finger on the wrong problem.
Don't get me started on weather forecasters telling you to wrap up warm. First of all, it's warmly, which is an adverb. And secondly, I get hypothermia if I want to. It's nothing to do with you, Louise Lear. So Mr. Streeting was asked about warnings, this was on the BBC, from charities that old people were worried about turning on their heating after the cuts. He replied, well, this is definitely a weekend to turn the heating on. And I'll just remind people that the Chancellor did take the decision to protect winter fuel allowance for the poorest pensioners, to protect people this winter and in future winters. And of course, the triple lock on pensions is guaranteed. So the state pension is higher this winter than it was last year and will be further higher next year. That's why the Chancellor has taken those decisions, Mr. Streeting said, and to make sure that we protect the vulnerable this winter. But I would certainly agree that this weekend is a weekend to layer up and put the heating on as well. Peter?
Yeah, I think this just shows the tone deafness of the government, because I go back to the caller you had, Peter, who the old woman sat... Teresa. I listened to that call and it was harrowing. That woman just sat in freezing. in her own home, I thought was awful. And I think those stories will resonate with the public very strongly. And, you know...
I've never had a reaction to a call.
I mean, it was incredible. But
hundreds of people got
we
in
could
touch.
talk about the farmers, we could talk about all these other issues, but I think this particular issue will be a long-standing problem for the Labour Party moving forward, because it is a human story. And it is also the government choosing to ignore its own impact assessments of the policies. And I think that's the real danger of this one, is that they charged ahead with this with like a bull in a china shop, and it didn't really make much sense. It didn't for me. They just wanted to show that they could make the tough decisions, and they just picked the wrong group at the wrong time. But yeah, West Street, I have to admit, I think he jumped in. I think he was caught a little open on this one. But yeah, it's bad comms through and through. But yeah, it's just the tone deafness. He's just like the way that he says, "Oh, and by the way," I thought was quite bad to say, well, no matter what you have to say, we have an answer to it, rather than actually listening to concerns. You know, we need a government that listens, and this is a huge issue for a lot of people, and I don't feel that the government is really connecting with the public. Not on this, not just on this, but on many, many other things. And I think that is where they're really falling down. They're getting absolutely no public support for anything they're trying, because they're just like throwing it on the public, and they're not really kind of bringing the public with them. They're not leading, they're dictating, for want of a better phrase.
I want to talk about Reform UK, because Nigel Farage has unveiled plans to try to unseat Kemi Badenoch. The question, I suppose, politically is, you know, what is a big majority anymore? It's really interesting, actually, when you think about we're going a little bit nerdy now, but there's 650 MPs, and if you go down the list of the size of the majority, when you get to number 326, right in the middle, in the last Parliament 2019, the majority was something like 11,500. Now it's about 6.5 when you get down to the sort of median one there, halfway down that list. Kemi Badenoch, who is the leader of the Conservative Party, of course, but also the MP for North West Essex. Her majority is only 2,610. She got 35.6% of the vote. And now, at the conference in Leicester that Nigel Farage has been having, it's a regional conference that Reform UK have been having yesterday. They announced Marco Longhi, former MP, has defected from the Conservatives to Reform UK. He's saying that the gloves are off, and that Kemi Badenoch are coming for Kemi Badenoch, and they want to take her constituency certainly a world away from the Brexit Party and the deal they did with the Conservatives in 2019. Sophia, your thoughts on this?
Well, I do think you're right there. It shows that it looks very unlikely that a deal will be done between the Conservatives and Reform Party, and that is really what the Conservatives need to do, I think, if they are going to survive in any kind of meaningful way and even have a chance of getting back into government. They will need to try and square off that kind of right of their party that is very concerned about issues that they don't seem to be addressing. So I think you know, Nigel Farage is well within his rights to target Badenoch.
It's democracy.
That's democracy. That's how it works. And obviously they've had this spat over the members, which is what has kicked off this kind of altercation. And I do think it was a bit unwise for Kemi to be publicly questioning the member tracker that they had on the Reform website. You would think she would have done her research to be absolutely ironclad guaranteed that it was fake before she made that accusation, and it now seems to be unravelling. So I don't think she's made a good political decision there.
What do you make of this, right, Peter?
First of all, if you want to get into a members measuring contest with Nigel Farage, that's very much on you. But I actually think it's all childish nonsense, and I think the public at large couldn't care less. I think this is Westminster bubble nonsense, whipped up by Reform, who are desperate for any headline and any attention, because that is what they desperately need to stay relevant. Because for a party that is still relatively small in terms of its political power, they need to keep relevant. They need to stay in the public eye.
But that's every political party, isn't it?
Reform more than ever, because they don't have any experience in governing, so they need to stay relevant. They need to stay in the public eye, and I think
they're making much more of an impression than the Conservatives, who have 24 MPs for every one of Reform's MPs.
Yeah, that's maybe true, but I look at council election results, I look at MRP polling that still say that the Conservatives are way ahead of Reform in many regards. Okay. But yeah, this idea that Reform are kind of gangbusters because yes, it's very impressive, but going from 0 to 1 is impressive, but you know, maintaining 11 to 12 is
we'll
different.
certainly see what they do, and if they take Kemi Bednock. Just a quick word, Sophia, on Luke Littler, the darts champion. Were you watching last night? What's your reaction?
I was not watching, but congratulations to him. What an achievement at age 17. And I do think maybe one good thing that will come out of it is maths might become cool again. Because the ability to make those calculations in the heat of the moment is very impressive, of course, as well as the skill to get the dart on target.
Absolutely, Peter.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this guy, 17 years old, like what, the youngest ever PDC world champion, is an incredible achievement, you know. And yeah, I think it's amazing. I genuinely do. It's really nice to see a proper kind of homegrown talent do really well. I think there's one thing I love about this country is we will see these people and we will raise them up, and you know, we will cheer them on, even if like darts is not my sport.
Yeah.
Well, the number of people I know that were watching it.
Well, exactly. I mean, darts wasn't my sport either. To be honest, I had absolutely no interest in it. And then really what Luke Littler has done is really, in regard to my views on darts, he's made me do something of a 180
No.
on that one. We're talking to Matt Porter, who is the chief executive. What's he the chief executive of? The Professional Darts Corporation. We're talking to him after the break. Sophia, you didn't at least smile at that ridiculous joke. Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, and thank you to those on the debate desk today.